Good afternoon and welcome to the SIP Hour Power Lunch, your midweek go-to conversation about all things Black women. Your SIP host, Tracy Sturdivant from the League, Adrian Shropshire from BlackPack, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project National Office. I'm Glenda Carr from Higher Heights, and Fatima Goss-Graves from the National Women's Law Center is off today. Before we get started, let us know where you are lunching from, or like me, having a late coffee. What city, what state, and stop and invite your crew to have lunch or a cup of coffee with us. We also want you to be engaged. This is a power-packed hour. And so, we want to hear your comments. If you have questions, drop questions. If you've got commentary, drop your commentary. And if you are not following the SIP Hour on all of the social channels, we are at the SIP Hour. We are rolling right out of Black History Month into Women's History Month, or better known as Glenda Carr's birthday month. Last month, we highlighted amazing Black women, from Polly Murray to Rihanna to Amanda Gorman to Mary Wilson. As we look ahead to International Women's Day, which is March 8th, we want to kick off Women's History Month with a now viral video that you may have seen on TikTok. I'm sure Judith has seen it because she's our resident TikTok person. TikTok influencer Kennedy. While it was meant to be for Black History Month, it is certainly perfect to kick off Women's History Month. Take a look.
Trying to rain on the thunder, tell a storm I'm new. I'm a walk, I'm a march on the regular, painting white flags blue. Lord forgive me, I've been running blind in truth. I'm a rain on this bitter love, tell a sweet I'm new. Ooh, I'm telling these tears go and fall away, fall away. Oh, may the last one burn into flames. Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose, yeah. Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too. I break chains all by myself. Won't let my freedom rot in hell. Hey, I'ma keep it running 'cause a winner don't quit on themselves. Lord.
Yes, I had not seen that. That's fire, and that's creativity.
All the aunties were shaking their head. See, y'all need to get on that Twitter kick. There's more when that
TikTok kick.
TikTok, look at you.
She's like, on the Twitter and TikTok.
Oh, TikTok, sorry.
TikTok. Create something that amazing. So,
yeah, it's I just want to say that TikTok has so many creative people, mostly youngish. And that's a great way to kick off the month. So let's get our conversation started. We got a lot to talk about today because there's a lot happening. And so the co-hosts are excited about being joined by Rahna Epting, who is the executive director of MoveOn. She leads both MoveOn Civic Action, which works to advance progressive policies and social change, and MoveOn Political Action, which works to elect candidates who are committed to standing up for an inclusive progressive agenda. Thank you for joining us, Rahna.
Thank you.
Important conversation we're gonna have because today is the 41st day of the Biden administration. And there's a lot of focus on what has been the pandemic, but there are also other issues that are affecting women and many groups that the administration needs to be paying to. So thanks for joining us, because we want to have a conversation about all these things. So let's start, Rahna, and I want the co-hosts to jump into this conversation too. So late yesterday, Neera Tanden withdrew her nomination in a letter to President Biden to be the director of OMB. stating, unfortunately, it now seems that there's no path forward to gain confirmation. I do not want continued consideration of my nomination to be a distraction for your other priorities. And so this withdrawal, right, number one, is important because it is like this kind of first foray into this new administration nominating someone in an environment where the Dems control the House. We have 50-50, and people think, okay, well, that means we have a lot of power on the Senate side, more than we had. And woman of color being nominated. And we know we have some others coming up, including Vanita Gupta for Department of Justice and Kristen Clark for Department of Justice. So, so what is your reaction to this, Rahna? You know, this was all, you know, they say it was about these mean tweets, and I just want you to know, like, mean tweets while y'all had your president who incited an insurrection, but you're worried about some so-called mean tweets. So from where you sit, what's the reaction and what's the way forward?
Well, I think two things. One, Neera Tanden is an incredibly accomplished, brilliant woman who would have been a great director of the OMB. And she did an honorable thing. And it was gracious how she bowed out. But the second point is it's a damn shame. It's a damn shame because senators that refuse to vote for her are the same senators that voted for Justice Kavanaugh. They're the same senators that voted for Bill Barr. People that have clear records, or, you know, Kavanaugh has a clear record of sexual assault. Bill Barr has a clear record of supporting our former president to try to attempt to undermine the election results of this election. And it's just, mean tweets are one thing. Actually assaulting people, actually degrading our democracy, that's a whole nother thing. And Neera would have been an excellent OMB director, and she would have led that office with complete integrity. And it's just a damn shame that they are trying to equate her past with those that they have clearly allowed and given a clear lane to just go, including our former president.
Right. So co-host, so what do you all say about this? Is this a bad look for the rest of like this administration in terms of confirmations? What should we expect, and what do they need to do to get out of this hole?
Yeah, we might be on the 41st day of the administration, but to remember that he doesn't have his full cabinet yet. All right, and he certainly has not moved. They have not moved many of his confirmation hearings to confirmation votes. That this could set a interesting precedent moving forward. Now he did signal I'll do it. I'm gonna take care of her. She's gonna be in administration somewhere. So I certainly am gonna be like, I'm certainly gonna see how y'all do that. Mm-hmm. But I do think, you know, we already are in such a politically fragile environment with this, you know, 50-50 Senate where every member is empowered, that this certainly can slow down. It has set, popped a football in the middle of that chamber, or I should say soccer ball, where certainly members will be jockeying, and I'm sure doing some behind, some closed door negotiation. Well, you need my vote for this. So I certainly think this is setting a chain of reactions that may happen moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with all that. One of the larger concerns that I have is how we are painting the leadership of women of color. And the bar that we are setting for women of color that look very different to, I think, Rahna's earlier point about the bar that's been set for white men. Deb Haaland's coming down the pipeline.
And mediocre white men at that point.
Well, I mean, we're going to speak the whole truth. But, Deb Haaland's coming down the pipeline for Secretary of Interior. They're already signaling that they have issues with, some of her past comments and stances on issues. But it's really interesting that the white men have been breezing through, when it comes to this conversation. So I do believe that we need to name this, and now, before the other women, particularly women of color, are up to bat next, to draw some spotlight on how both the media is covering them and their past comments about specific issues. And frankly, to your point about there being sort of 50-50, like at the end of the day, during the Trump administration, like he got everybody he wanted, right? For the Dems to have all three branches, technically, that this is such a slow, arduous process. I'm trying to understand why we're slow walking this stuff and why we're not putting more pressure to make sure that Biden has what he needs to get his administration in place and to expedite this and to make sure that everyone comes out on the other side. So we're gonna need to put more pressure, the we being sort of citizens and voters, to make sure that our elected officials are doing what they need to do to get this administration off and running.
Adrian, you're an expert on the Senate. What say you?
I think that there is a signal here. I mean, some people have gone through, right? And not just white men, right? I think that there's also a signal here about, especially when Neera is, I think a case by herself, because I think in this instance, it is the thing where people decided that they did not like her and her past, right? And so not her past tweets. This is not about her tweets, right? It is about who she is and how she has shown up politically, about her progressive stances, about how she's not afraid to speak truth to power or any of them. And that's what this is about. It's not about her tweets. We also, when we think about Vanita and Kristen coming up, it is about people's opinion about civil rights. It is about people's opinion around the civil rights division, about voting rights, all of that stuff, right? That I think is what is being uncovered here, right? Not just, something that someone said, once, or a speaker that someone allowed to come to their campus when they were a 19-year-old college student. I mean, that is not the issue here at all. It is about not liking people who will speak forcefully and speak truth. That happens to be embodied in many of these cases in women of color and Black women specifically.
So, I want to move a little bit because you mentioned this issue around civil rights. So yesterday, there was there are a couple of cases in front of the Supreme Court that people should know about that are voting rights cases. The cases at stake in these particular cases, they revolve around some laws, some issues in Arizona. But most importantly about these cases is that we know that the Supreme Court took a dagger to the Voting Rights Act some years ago by gutting it, taking out Section 5, which allowed the pre-approval of election laws before they went into effect to make sure that they weren't discriminatory. That's gone. We have this other section of the Voting Rights Act, which is Section 2, that allows for lawyers like me to go into court and say that these laws that they're passing are denial of voting rights. And we get to use statistics in showing it because, they don't often say, hey, we don't want Black people to vote. We don't want young people. They don't do that anymore, for the most part. But they do their homework and they know the statistics, they just don't talk about it. So this particular section, if it falls, will leave us with no protections other than the Constitution that doesn't really protect y'all. So, Rahna, I want to talk some about during the argument, the lawyer for the Republicans made clear that actually in a question by the new Supreme Court Justice, that they actually do pass these laws because it gives them a competitive advantage. Now, a lot of people are like, oh my God, they're being clear about it. First of all, that doesn't help us on the legal side because actually the courts say it's okay to be partisan in what you do in passing laws because you want to win. So that doesn't help us. But talk about this. They're revealing their hand. They're like, hey, yep, we want to win and we don't care who we take down.
Yeah, this is part of a long generational campaign that goes well beyond before we were all born. But Republicans these days clearly know that if more people can vote, that means they're less likely to be in power because their ideas just aren't popular. They're not inclusive. They're interested in governing for people that look like them and act like them, and they don't believe in multiracial democracy. So, I mean, last time I was here was January 6th. The insurrection was literally happening as we were talking. Yeah, and that is another example of this massive campaign they're launching. They Trump back in August started this whole narrative before he even knew the outcome of the election that the election's probably going to be rigged if I lose. And he built it up. He built a massive following, and people believed him to the point where the people that showed up at the Capitol on January 6th, they truly believed they were saving their democracy.
But Rahna, but I wanted to ask you, so there are two bills in Congress that could potentially help us. One is called HR 1, the other one is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. But everybody's saying these two things that could protect our democracy will not pass because of the filibuster. So, what's MoveOn gonna do? We gotta save this democracy. What's up?
Yeah, well, we've been talking a lot about it. And actually right now while we're meeting, the House is meeting on the For the People Act. So let's talk a bit about what's in it, and then I'll talk about how we get it. So what's in it is the most comprehensive democracy reform legislation in the history of this country, everywhere from finally addressing the influx of big money in our political system that drowns out our voices. It has voting rights expansion laws. It doesn't have all of them. We still need the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. It has legislation that will finally make redistricting fair again and not make it this thing that Republicans can wield to lock onto their power, and much, much more. It is an incredible piece of legislation. Let me just put it this way. The Senate is broken. The rules do not allow for those in power to legislate. The Senate filibuster that we hear a lot about gives Mitch McConnell, now the minority leader, the ability to block legislation that the people want to see passed. So until we put enough pressure on our senators to demand that they change the rules of the Senate, which they can, 51 senators, 50 plus Kamala Harris, the vice president, can change the rules of the Senate. They can get rid of this arcane filibuster rule that's there in the first place to block civil rights legislation. And they can change rules so that you need 51 votes in order to pass any legislation. Until we do that, all the things, all the dreams, all the issues, all the things that we went to the ballot box for, that we believe in, that we know this country needs to address the epic crises before us, all of those things are going to be blocked in the Senate.
Why do you think the current Democratic leadership has not put pressure? Like, why wasn't this the first thing that came to the floor, in your opinion?
Well, I wish I had the power to read minds, but I think my assessment is they want to try. So Joe Biden is institutionalist through and through. He was in the Senate forever, as long as I remember. He really believes in rules and procedures of the Senate, and he really actually truly believes in bipartisan negotiation. I think he wishes we were the Congress that we were 10 years ago. We're not. We have a Republican Party that is doing everything they can to take power away from this growing country of multitude of diversities. Like, they don't want that. And so I think Joe Biden really wants to see, can we get back to the Congress we were, where we actually did negotiate across the aisle and we were friends, and I just,
bless his heart.
Trying it. He's trying, bless his heart. He's trying it. It's not going to work. And they're going to have to eventually decide, they're going to have to choose between delivering for the people and things we voted for, or doing a bipartisan circus, that's going to result in mediocre policies that aren't going to help anybody. They're just going to keep the same old thing. And then it's going to risk us winning in 2022. And we may be out.
So I have one last question for you. So we were together, as you mentioned, watching the insurrection unfold live from the city. Now, like this, what are we, like almost 2 months later? What do you think? How does this country move forward? What, you know, like, we are deeply, deeply divided. This QAnon craziness, right, that people really do believe is, like, you know, really hurting us. And so we can't act like the insurrectionists went away, right? We can't act like they're fine. They went back to their states and we don't have to pay attention to them, although they're coming back apparently this week or something to DC. But they're not going away. So how do we move forward as a country?
So I know we're almost at time, so I'll keep it brief. We have to hold those accountable that are complicit in the lie, the massive lie that this election was stolen, the massive lie that they've been perpetuating. And we have to do the work. Democrats in Congress, the progressive movement, regular folks have to do the work to deliver the wins, deliver the things that people voted for, to show the contrast that we actually are for a multiracial democracy that works for all of us. And if we can't do both, I think we'll be in dire straits. And the last thing I'll say, I do think we need a healthy Republican Party. Negotiating with fascists is not in any of our interests. And so how do we hold those accountable, like Ted Cruz and Senator Hawley, that have been whipping this up? But how do we do it in a way that doesn't undermine how I know I sound crazy, but like, I miss just arguing over policy as opposed to facts these days, you know, and what's true and what's not. So accountability, holding those accountable, and we've got to fight for the things that we voted for, and we got to make sure Democrats deliver on that.
Well, thank you, Rahna. Thanks for joining us. I feel like, you know, we got cut short that last time. That's for sure, as we had our mouths wide open what we were witnessing. So thanks for joining us, and we will definitely have you back. We want to keep in touch and make sure that, you know, we hear more about what's happening at MoveOn. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to kick it over to Glenda.
Great, thank you. So we're moving on. As I mentioned, this is going to be our Powered Pact discussion. And this next segment is something that is an issue that is top of mind for Black women. Some of the polling that I know that Black PAC and Higher Heights and many of our partner organizations have done is that Black women are definitely concerned about the safety of Black men in our lives, and frankly, Black women. In recent years, particularly since the fatal shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, police brutality has been a hot button issue in the United States. In 2020, there were 1,004 fatal police shootings. Y'all, you heard that? 1,004 fatal police shootings. And in 2019, there were 999 fatal shootings. Additionally, the rate of fatal police shootings among Black Americans was much higher than that of any other ethnicity, which we know, right? And standing at 35 fatal shootings per million of the population just this past February, well, last week, February. Was it last week? Yesterday. Sadly, the trend for fatal police shooting in the United States seems to only be increasing, with a total of 132 civilians having been shot, 16 of them Black, in the first 2 months of this year. Here to talk about Black women organizing and organizing around racial equality and fighting against police brutality is writer, protester, organizer, and co-founder of Campaign Zero, Janetta Elsey. So before we invite her to the conversation with the SIP host, let's take a look at a clip about the work of Campaign Zero. Janetta was an activist that was on the ground during Ferguson in 2014. So take a look at their work.
At Campaign Zero, we believe we can kill people.
There's an easy way to stop it. Arrest the cops. Charge the cops.
All right, we're in the
Charge
package.
all the cops. Not just some of them.
In Ferguson, my life was forever changed with the senseless killing of Mike Brown Jr. at the hands of Ferguson police. I was there the night he was killed, and I've been in the streets ever since, fighting for justice and making sure that you have no choice but to listen to us.
No justice, no
My name is Janetta Elzie, a proud St. Louis native, protester, organizer, and co-founder of Campaign Zero.
Hey, Janetta, thanks for joining us. We oftentimes speak about a new generation of organizers, and your name will certainly be a part of that discussion and a part of this legacy. Can you share with the SIP community how not only the death of Michael Brown, but the organizing you've done since 2014, how has that changed your life and how you've approached this work?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And actually, police violence was a part of my life in February of 2014, when one of my close friends, Stefan Avery Hart, was killed by St. Louis City Police, about a mile away from Mike Brown, where he was eventually killed in August of 2014. So in 2014, I suffered 3 great losses. My mother passed in January. My close friend was killed by the police, and then Mike Brown was killed in August of 2014. And I had just turned 25. And so that was the most fearless I have ever been in my life, especially as I'm getting older. I'm always constantly thinking about 25-year-old me and what she would do, and how fearless she actually was. In the beginning, in the early days, I actually I didn't even know that what we were doing was called organizing. We were just doing. And we saw, little pockets of holes that needed to be filled. And so we just went to action. And between just people feeling that need of being in community with each other and our community online, back then it was STL Twitter, not even Black Twitter. And it was like regional Twitter. So there was Chicago Twitter and Atlanta Twitter and all these places where Black people were, and they were tuned in and saying, how can we help? And a lot of people just started showing up. And so it just so happened that we kept going outside and just never left, really. And so from all of that, a lot of questions from policymakers and politicians were like, what do you all want? And so our answer to that question was, we created Campaign Zero, which is a 10-point policy plan on ending police violence in America. And so from there, we've just launched several campaigns. Most recently, the End All No Knocks, which is our answer to the death of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, working with organizers in Louisville. Breonna Taylor's family lawyer is involved in our work, and just really trying to eliminate these problematic provisions in police union contracts that even allow no-knock warrants to become raids like the one that killed Breonna.
Yeah. I think you saying that you didn't know that you were organizing, you were just doing the work, is how Black women show up in our history. It's an intergenerational approach to how we show up for our families and our communities. Where do you see there being the progression of that work from 2014 to obviously entering into last year, 2020, where you had uprisings across this country during a global pandemic? Where did you see the progression of your work through 2020?
2020 was so unexpected to me. I was coming out of a semester at school. I went to school for a year just to, take a break, try it out. Did really well. And then I was like, okay, I'm over this, and decided to come to DC, called myself relaxing. Oh, was I wrong? So as soon as I got here, maybe like 2 weeks later, George was killed. And then immediately, like, the people who did know I was here were like, are you going out? And, I'm just trying to like stay focused on like, no, I'm here to relax. I'm here to, I just got done with this. I need to rest mentally, And eventually I started going back outside. And so it was then that I noticed like the crowd was different. It was definitely more intergenerational. My sister's peers, my sister is 20. And in 2014, she was definitely not coming outside, definitely not with me at least. And her little friends had to stay in the house. But now her and her little friends are grown and they're outside. So I met a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who were just like, I couldn't drive, or my mom took my car, or they controlled what I could see on the phone, blah, blah, blah. And now these kids are, you know, they're 18, they're 19, they're away at school, and they have a voice. And so they're outside and they're using it. So being able to be in conversation with them, be in the streets with them, that just like totally revitalized just my work, my spirit, my energy for sure. Also just hearing, I wish that I had the knowledge that they have at 18 and 19, that I now have at 31. So just them getting a grasp on structural issues so soon and so early, I can only imagine where they'll be in 10 or 12 years.
So Janetta, I want to jump in and ask you a question. And I also want to extend this arc back a little bit, because today is also the 30th anniversary of the day that Rodney King was beaten. And so when we think about what has come out of each of these graphic, horrific moments, there's always the question of, okay, so what are the laws that need to change? Right? Like, how do we stop this from happening? And so from where you sit at this point, given your experience and the work that Campaign Zero has done, what do you think about how we approach these laws? We know there's a Justice and Policing Act that's in Congress right now, local jurisdictions, and because of organizing coming out of last summer, have been working to not just to defund, to redirect resources away from law enforcement and into things that are actually going to help the community survive. How do you think about the kinds of laws that we need to change?
Oh goodness. So we actually are involved in a lot of different legal conversations across the country. We're doing work in maybe 50 cities right now. So that's 50 different city council members, legislators, aldermen, whoever, state senators. We've even had conversations with Congress folks, all trying to just consult people on the language in their bills in the first place. I would say that there's a lot of legislation that went up last summer and over the fall and into the winter. But the language in the bills, they have to have teeth that actually hold people accountable, which means that the people who are writing this language have to have that as a focus in their actual bill. So what we've seen is there's a lot of it's just a little empty in most places. And then you have some folks who are actually really committed to making a change. So like the folks we deal with in Austin, the Austin City Council, they've been really straightforward and progressive in actually meeting the needs of their constituents. And so that's like a unicorn basically, but that's like a model of how it could be when people are committed to actually following through on campaign promises of reallocating funds elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm gonna shift to a discussion that I'm gonna bring Judith in to this conversation. Is what is your vision or the work that y'all are going to do, the work that is ahead of us around the Biden-Harris administration, right? We recognize that the first 100 days, there's a lot going on there, from COVID-19 to, just getting the country moving forward. But beyond those like top two priorities, what are the two things that Judith and Jonetta, you want to see them tackle first? And that may be from an executive order, but more importantly, just setting the tone on the policies that we need to move forward on this particular issue.
Go ahead, Judith. I'll let you have the floor. I've been talking a lot.
So I think, so right now, actually this week, the Justice and Policing Act is supposed to go to the floor for a vote, and no hearings, because they had hearings last year. And so I think this is an important moment around whether or not our members of Congress have the chutzpah to actually do something around policing. And I would say the most important thing in that bill is qualified immunity. I have a lot of problems with the bill, but we can say that for another time. But qualified immunity, which is the thing that protects police officers from liability, is like the bar. And if that doesn't happen, then, and it gets amended on the Senate side, then the bill should just die a quick death. The other thing is, the Biden administration's talked about having a task force, and, quite frankly, been there, done that. We had a 21st century task force in the Obama administration that came up with recommendations. And now it's time to either move them to like some legislative processes, but also this administration has the ability to really work around this funding issue, right? If we want to reimagine safety, that means investing in our communities, in mental health professionals, in violence prevention, because police don't prevent violence, right? So how do we get that money put into the budget so it incentivizes local jurisdictions to actually do that work?
Ditto. And that was such a great answer. Also, I actually, at Campaign Zero, we know that there was that meeting a few months ago with all the civil rights leaders, and it was like legacy organizations. And because we're still so new to the scene,
some of the civil rights leaders, not all.
Some legacy folks for sure, and legacy orgs for sure. And it just seemed like, we missed on that moment, or we were looked over for that moment, and unsure what that was, or if it's because we're so new to the scene, so young, who knows. But we're open to engaging the administration for sure.
That is an actually interesting transition to my last question, which is, if we're really going to build inclusive tables and having all the voices at the table, what is your charge to ensure that young voices, and you're technically an OG now, like in the movement,
right?
Ensure that we are including young activists and young citizens in this conversation?
I truly think it's just extending the invitation. You literally have no clue what people will say until you make the move, and you make the ask. And truly, I'm 32, and I started doing this when I had just turned 25. Trust me, I feel like I'm an OG in this, and I would love to not only be in the room, but make space for someone else and politely move elsewhere. I'm very aware of just the seniorness in this movement space for me, but it is extending the invite, and I know that people would show up and take it seriously.
And I guess we have a question, last rapid response question. I'm gonna open it up to anyone. I'm starting with you, Janetta, but anyone, the SIP host can ask. What's our charge to ensure that our young people stay engaged?
I would just say political education, just constantly and continually educating on what's the stem of the issue, how that manifests itself today, and just reimagining what the future could be.
When you say political education, I'm like education. Right? It's like investment in education and jobs for kids. Like we're talking about the increase in violence, and it's like, well, let's talk about where this economy is. Let's talk about where the investments are not happening in the midst of a global pandemic, and how it's going to be worse, right, for our communities, while you're continuing to invest in policing us. So really, this conversation about what defund the police means and how we get our folks on board with that too, because there's some, it's probably some SIP watchers who also need to understand the complexity of what we're talking about. We know what it is in our bones. The language might be something that is preventing folks to like be where we need them to be, but like for young people know it intuitively. They know it in their bones. They know they need us to invest in them and advocate for them. And so for me, that's education. That is them being able to have what they need to be able to not just survive but thrive in this world, that I think also helps us to shift this dynamic. And so if we defund, I'm ready for us to fund their success.
Well, and I just want to add, I think we also need to know that young people are incredibly engaged right now, and I love to see it. Like all the work that we do at Advanced Project with like the Police Free Schools movement. I mean, these high school students, like this Gen Z, like ain't no joke, ain't no
Right.
joke. So they're taking on the police, they're taking on the school systems, and so it's beautiful. Love to see it.
Yeah.
Well, Janetta, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you'll come back and continue to be in conversation and community with the SIP.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Janetta.
Bye.
So I'm gonna take us in a slightly different direction, but around an issue that is just as heavy. And it feels like maybe over the last couple of years, partly because there's some high profile cases, and also because we had Black women legislators lifting up this issue of Black maternal health. And Black maternal mortality in particular. So we, are now Vice President Harris, when she was Senator Kamala Harris, introduced legislation around protecting the health of Black women during pregnancy. We, read about Serena Williams and we read about Beyonce, and it really elevated this, critical issue that was overlooked, right, in many ways. And so this is, I think, an opportunity for us to have this conversation in the SIP community about this topic. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience pregnancy-related death than white women. Black women are more likely to experience preventable maternal death when compared to white women. And these stats are, the stats, right? Regardless of income, regardless of education. These are real issues. And so I'm really excited for us to be joined today by Angelina Spicer, who is, okay, so one, if people are not following her on TikTok or Instagram, this is your moment to get your life together and follow her. But she is a comedian and an activist and a postpartum survivor. So has brought a lot to this conversation. And so I'm really excited. I was excited when I realized that we were going to be having this conversation and you were going to be joining us, because I also felt like, oh, I have a testimony that I've never told, right? And so I think the question, I'm interested to know what led you on this journey? Because you had a story and you told it and have been using it to educate other women. So what's that journey been like for you?
It's been an interesting one. First of all, thank you all so much for having me today. And I love to hear that other women also struggled or have a testimony or a story to share, because I have learned that it isn't until I begin to share my story that other people then co-sign and say, oh, I call it the new Me Too movement, because we all have a moment where there was like a switch that happened. For me, for my journey and sharing my story, it was a seamless one, mostly because I'm a stand-up comic. I tell my business as my profession. I make it funny. I find entryways into my own pain. So for me, that was the easy part. But there was still a part of my story that I wasn't quite willing to share because I had so much shame around it. And that was, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression at 8 months postpartum. Mm-hmm. So most people, think that it's an overnight thing or a shortened amount of time, or that it happens right away. Mine, the onset didn't happen until many, many months later. And it was actually with the help of my therapist that I was diagnosed. It wasn't my OBGYN. It wasn't my primary care doctor. It was a therapist that I was paying out of pocket to see, who diagnosed me. Actually recommended that I go inpatient to a psychiatric facility for treatment. And when I tell you it was the best vacation of my life, I felt taken of. I felt like, I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to change sheets. I didn't have to do laundry. It was just like everybody just took care of me. And for so long, I felt like I was missing from my own life. I felt like my old self had died. So getting that hall pass to go to the hospital was like a blessing. But that part of my story, I had a lot of shame around, because in private conversations, when I would share it, people would say, "Oh, wow, you had it real bad," or "Oh man, oh, you went to the crazy house," not knowing that I ran in there. I was happy to go, okay, and happy to stay. I didn't actually want to leave. But it was my skill set of being a comic, performing on stage, and actually that helped me realize that I was not alone. I wasn't alone in my experiences of not really liking the early stages of motherhood. I didn't like it. And I felt the freedom to say that on stage, and women and men, the staff at the comedy clubs would laugh, they cheer. And that gave me permission to feel like, okay, this is normal and y'all agree. So I'm not by myself out here.
Right. Well, let's talk about what it is. Cause I think back in maybe my mother's or our mother's generation, I think they call it baby blues. Baby blues. Right. You had the baby blues. But talk a little bit about what is it? Because I know that you did an Instagram live recently where, so they're talking about you being diagnosed 8 months after. I think the woman that you were talking to said that actually the symptoms start to evolve even during pregnancy. Right. Yes. And so talk a little bit about what it is and like what are signs that folks should look for?
Okay, great question. People ask me that all the time, thinking that I'm an expert. I am not. I was blindsided by this thing, but I have now looked it up, so I kind of do know. So postpartum depression and anxiety, postpartum depression and anxiety actually do develop while you're pregnant, particularly the anxiety. And that was the case with me. I did not have the language or the tools to know that there was such a thing as postpartum anxiety. And it was mostly because my doctors didn't ask me how I was doing during that time, and and as Black women, there's this feeling that we always got to be strong. I'm a strong Black woman, like Harriet Tubman and Butterworth, I'm a strong Black woman. I'm strong, So, there's also this added layer of shame and guilt for not feeling happy about it and for actually speaking up about it. And I too had the same experience with my grandmother, for example. My grandma told me, "Oh, honey, that's just the baby blues." And I'm like, "Grandma, like, what am I supposed to do? Get a cigar and some whiskey? Like, what? You make it sound glamorous. What is this, But, I always tell moms and dads too, to really look out for anxiety, because that is actually what triggered my postpartum depression. And I would like stare at the baby monitor. That was the sign of anxiety for me and my husband. When I stare at the baby monitor, I would check to see if she was breathing every 5 or 10 minutes. And no matter how clean my house was, no matter how many things on my to-do list were taken care of, I was never able to fully rest. I wasn't able to decompress, really sleep well. I was always anxious for the next thing. The depression, meanwhile, I hated going home. Like my husband would give me breaks and we would give each other breaks, and I would cry every time it was time for me to go home. So like over emotional, crying a lot, feeling helpless and hopeless, feeling like you don't know, you need help, but you don't know what exactly to ask for. Those are some of the signs to look out for. Now, if I had gone to medical school, I'd probably give you a full list, but I did not. I am a comedian and I lived it. So I can give you what happened actually to me from my own lived experience.
I would imagine this is complicated by the fact that, like, as a community, you know, we don't like to talk about mental health issues at all, right?
All.
Like, I remember people saying, and you know, anybody talk about postpartum depression,
Something wrong
oh,
with
that's for white women.
That's
Right.
right. That's right.
That's for white
Please. That's one of my jokes. Yes.
right.
I was like, how did I get this? Who did I touch in Starbucks? What is this?
You know, Angelina, your point about depression and anxiety being two different things, I think is spot on, because I know I had anxiety, and I wasn't a person who had anxiety issues until I had this baby. I was like, what is wrong? I didn't want to leave the child, still don't want to leave the child. And I think it's also, I was just talking before the show about me not wanting to drop this child out with somebody else. And it's like, when did I become this person? And was checking in with myself to go like, am I depressed? I'm like, no, I ain't depressed. I'm not depressed, but there's something, right? And because Black folks don't like to talk about mental health, like to your point, Judy, like feeling like, well, I guess I'll just keep this bottled up inside. So it's like, how long does like, is there a shelf life on this thing? I mean, the real question is, you know, do we believe that the health field has done a good job at educating? Because my OB was great, and I remember her asking me like some questions about like, are you depressed? And I'm like, no, but it's something else. Go like, what's this other thing I'm feeling? No, we ain't got nothing. No, that's don't have a name. Okay, well, I'll just go back home and be anxious.
So you actually told her, I'm not depressed, but something else is off.
Well, I didn't have the language, like, to your point. And like, even, you know, my family's like, girl, you all right. You know, it's like, you all right. I'm like, but now they're like, you know, you should let that baby go outside by itself. You know? I'm like, no, we can't.
Right, 100%. And you know what? The anxiety is actually more common than postpartum depression, which is why I usually talk about both.
Right.
Also because I had both.
Right.
But I do, you know, your question is twofold, and I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but there is not enough done to educate women and families. It's not just a woman's responsibility to be educated about how her body, her mind, her well-being will change after she has a baby. You know, it's also her partner, and her partner could be her mother or whoever her caregivers are, whoever the family is. Everyone is educated. So I was not, you know, educated on what intrusive thoughts were, for example. Intrusive thoughts are another thing that's very common with women, where you feel like your thoughts are not your own. So it feels like this recurring nightmare, this recurring dream that's really vivid and scary. It keeps replaying.
I'm like, no, I had it.
That's all right. That's a judge. I had it.
No judgment. I'm like, I'm gonna take that off the list.
Right, we're checking the list. Everybody's like, got the list out. Okay.
I mean, I think that, you know, for me, it's like, what needs to happen, right? Like, you've got Beyonce and Serena telling their stories, but like, where's the accountability, you know, on the government to do more?
100%. And I have in implementing legislative change here in California, because that's really where it needs to start. You know, it's really a three-pronged way to minimize this issue that women are having. You know, I think that our legislators need to do more. Our healthcare providers need to do more to educate us on the nuts and bolts of what things are, what they mean, and so that we have the language to really articulate what we're feeling. Right. And then also there's societal pressure and societal change that needs to be implemented also, so that we can talk to our mom friends, our friends who've had kids before us, and say, did you feel like this? Or did you go through this? Because I tell you, when I went through it, everybody was like, girl, you'll be all right. Just get a drink and have some sex. And I'm like, wow. That's how we got here. But I'm really laser focused on the legislative aspects of this. And I've worked with Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris, she was a senator, and excited that we have an advocate in the White House who is aware that, you know, Black women are dying at higher rates. Black women are more likely to develop postpartum depression.
Are you still there, Angelina?
Did we lose Angelina?
I think we lost her.
We might have lost her.
Oh no.
I'm so glad.
Well,
yeah, because we needed her to talk about her documentary. But
I know.
Also, like, I just want to, like, before we move on, like, This is, first of all, it's a damn shame that anybody should have to legislate around this. That's number one.
Yeah.
And this is like the confluence of issues around like our community not wanting to like talk about mental health issues,
Right.
the like kind of like ultra responsibility of women to like just, just
Be okay.
move on. It's a, you're fine. Like you just, stop tripping on, like we're all fine, and just carry the pain and don't say anything about it.
Yeah.
And the health system, right, that doesn't recognize or lift up and acknowledge the pain that we carry, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that confluence of things that just lets this go undetected and not responded to.
Well, and that's the thing, because like Tracy, you said your doctor asked me, like nobody asked me nothing.
Right. And I'm a Black woman doctor.
I'm a Black woman doctor.
Me too. She's like, yeah, okay, I don't know what all that
you
is.
good? I'm like, yeah, good. I guess so. Should I be? Is this what good looks like? Okay, well.
Well, let's, so the one thing we didn't get to talk to her about was the documentary called The Push for Permission. And so we'll have to have her back on to talk to us about the permission. So that was great, having that conversation with her in particular. So Tracy, I'm going to toss it over to you. I don't even know what time it is. I guess we could talk about one hot topic.
Time I got some rapid fire hot topics for y'all. Did anyone watch the Golden Globes? Because Black folks cleaned up, sort of, kind of, because they were making up for not having any Black folks voters. So they said, oh, our bad. We'll just give all of the awards to the Black people.
One for you.
One for you get an award and you get an award. So Andra Day won for Best Actress, which had only happened one other time in this category for her portrayal of Billie Holiday in the U.S. versus Billie Holiday. Chadwick Boseman won for Best Actor. So we won Best Actor and Actress. He won for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and his wife gave a beautiful acceptance speech. If you didn't get a chance to see it, I would encourage you to do so. Daniel Kaluuya won for supporting actor in Judas and the Black Messiah, and had the most 2020 thing happen to him. It was like, you're on mute. And they were like, we can't hear you.
The production team was like, because they did a hybrid award ceremony, and they were like, the SIP production's better than their production.
Well, he was like,
don't tell Dennis that.
He said, y'all trying to do me dirty. I am here and I have a speech you are going to
like, we're gonna start over.
Right. The team from Soul, which was one of my son's favorite movies last year, won for Best Score and Screenwriting. So there were lots of Black folks who won at the Globes. Before we go, I did want to lift up that yesterday, President Biden said that everybody who wants a vaccination will be able to get one by May. So that was moved up from 2 months, their initial projection, which is exciting. So if you wanted to book a vacation, I would encourage you to get in there now.
Did you do that, Tracy? Did you book it?
I saw it on the news, and then I called the realtor. I said, hey girl, hey, so listen. What's going on with these July dates? Can I, is it too late? How can we get out of these vacation streets? There's I really would love for us to have a conversation about all 3 vaccines that are going to be available to the community and what it means for our community. Like, not all vaccines are created equal. And there's like a discussion amongst folks, like a vaccine is a vaccine and everyone should take it.
Even disagreement within this group, this
That's right. That's right.
I will say though, Tracy, just one little, I think what he said was that there would be enough vaccine for every adult
who wants it.
The distribution would take a little longer. So you might want to call your real estate.
Look, I said, I'm looking for July. I gave a 2-month buffer. I mean, I'm here in Georgia. Like, I'm looking at the list of when we're eligible, and
it's long.
Plus, please. And people from Texas and Mississippi are coming to visit Georgia, and they ain't gonna have no. They
Look,
got no mask on or anything.
I'm calling up CVS like, y'all got some extra laying around. So long conversation about this rollout that continues to be a conversation as we inch up on the anniversary of the lockdown, of what quarantine and the shutdown of the globe looks like in the next couple of days and weeks ahead. So we are excited about seeing everyone. I'm going to toss to Glenda to wrap us up.
Like you're tossing to me. Yes. And so we are actually hitting the year. The executive order for the shutdown was March 13th. And my last activity out that was social was my birthday on March 8th.
She's like, did I say my birthday?
You didn't hear me.
We're celebrating it on Sunday, so meet us back on Sunday with the SIP. If you are new and you're just watching this, follow us on our channels at the SIP Hour across all platforms except for TikTok, because the aunties ain't there yet. But meet us on Wednesdays and Sunday at 2 o'clock. So see you this Sunday with your SIP host, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Tracy Sturdivant from the League, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project National Office. I'm Glenda Carr from Higher Heights, and our girl Fatima Goss-Graves from the National Women's Law Center will be back on Sunday. Take care.
Be well.
Bye.